Welcome to Innovations and Breakthroughs with your host, Rich Goldstein, talking about the evolutionary, the revolutionary, the inspiration and the perspiration, and those aha moments that change everything. And now here's your host, Rich Goldstein.
Rich Goldstein here, host of the Innovations and Breakthroughs podcast, where I feature top leaders and the path they took to create change. Past guests include Joe Polish, Roland Frazier, and Kevin Nations. This episode is brought to you by my company, Goldstein Patent Law, where we help you to protect your ideas and products. We've advised and obtained patents for thousands of companies over the past 27 years. So if you're a company that has software, product, or a design you want protected, go to goldsteinpatentlaw.com, where there are amazing free resources for learning about the patent process. And you can email my team at welcome@goldsteinpc.com to explore if it's a match to work together. You could also check out the book I wrote for the American Bar Association that explains in plain English how patents work. It's called the ABA Consumer Guide to Obtaining a Patent. I have with me here today Kevin Mako. Kevin is the founder of product design firm Mako Design Plus Invent. They take physical products from the idea stage and bring it all the way to store shelves. He's also host of the Product Startup Podcast, which is the #1 podcast of the hardware product development industry. And we recorded an episode together where he interviewed me, and that episode is now live. So I encourage you to go hop over to that podcast, the Product Startup Podcast, and check out the episode that I did over there. And probably you'd want to subscribe to see the rest of the episodes that they do. Very interesting stuff. But I am very pleased to welcome here today, Kevin Mako. Welcome, Kevin.
Rich, thanks so much. Very excited to be on the show. And look, I just want to say before we get going, that was a great episode. And for everyone listening out there, especially if you're interested in understanding the patent landscape from kind of A to Z, difference between utility and design patents, Rich, you did a great job of breaking out all that along with some tips and tricks, especially in the invention or hardware or physical product industry. So thanks again for being on our show. That was a beauty. So I definitely recommend anyone listening now, check it out at the Product Startup Podcast. And thanks again, Rich, for being on the show. Looking forward to chatting with you today now on your show.
Yeah, my pleasure. And actually, a cool thing about that show is we talked about something that I don't know if I've talked about in other podcasts, which is the kind of like the high level expert tips to how you create a patent portfolio as you're developing a product, as you're making improvements upon the product. And some people often ask, should I wait to file the patent? And we really talked about the approach that the pros use for doing multiple applications and continuations in part. So it was good stuff. Great episode. You kind of drew out of me something that I haven't talked about, which is, I think, really helpful for people that want to take their patenting to the next level. So thanks for doing that. And yeah, that was fun. And but let's talk about you now. So you've gone pretty far in the product design industry. A lot of people are in product design or pretty much one-person shops, and you've grown a team of 30 plus people, and you have offices in 4 different cities. And essentially, you've done product design on a high level. You've basically taken quite an entrepreneurial journey through developing your company as a real company, as an entrepreneurial venture, in addition to the product design stuff that you do. So I think there's a lot that you could share with people that are taking their entrepreneurial journey, especially product-based entrepreneurs, because really that's the nexus of what brings it all together. You've had an entrepreneurial journey and lessons learned there, and you've worked on thousands of products in terms of developing them. So very excited to have you here. And so in terms of where to start, I would say, let's start with how you got into product design. How did it all get started?
Yeah, I appreciate that. It started it seems now like a long time ago, 21 years ago, just in high school. And all of this, I started just because I was struggling to get my invention idea developed. I had this product idea. I wanted to simply get it designed and engineered and taken to production. And I thought it was a cool, new, hot thing. And back in 99, that was incredibly difficult to do as a startup. So as I was working through this model and whatnot, I said, well, you know what, forget my little goofy gadget that I came up with. I could really change the world by providing this as a service. How do I create a world-class end-to-end physical product design firm tailored exclusively to startups and inventors? So the interesting thing here is when I started, you imagine, rewind 20 years ago, everyone thought I was nuts. Every design firm owner that I talked to, whether it's industrial design or mechanical engineering, even patent agents that I talked to at the time, they said, oh, forget it. You want to work with startups and inventors? Like the industrial design firms, they just don't do that. You maybe will work with one or two to pay the bills, but then you want a stepping stone up to those big Fortune 500 revolving monthly contracts. And that's really what, at the time, especially pretty much most of the revenue from most of the design firms did. That was the business model. So I really went into the grain because I loved entrepreneurship. I loved the startup space. I was one myself. So I created this kind of niche within a niche. And at the idea at that time, it sounded crazy, but we struck a chord. This is the early days where Kickstarter and Indiegogo started to get the ball rolling. You started seeing university incubators. You started seeing WeWork style places popping up and all kinds of information and news and around the entrepreneurship. You even think of Shark Tank, Dragon's Den, that sort of stuff, right? This became really hot topics. Entrepreneurship became a hot topic, and we put ourselves right into the middle of that. So I went into this business, incorporated it in third year university in 2007. I turned down the job offers from business school that I was at to go study at Hong Kong University for supply chain management and manufacturing, and then did this full time right out of the gate, $50,000 in student debt. And still to today, I have no investors, no debt, no financing. We've grown it to a 4-office, 30-person design house. Again, same model, product development for startups and small businesses. The very same model that we started with, just grown organically all the way up through the pathway there.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's interesting. That's kind of similar to my journey. Not that this is about me, this is your interview, but just to say that, like, coming out of law school and starting my own practice is kind of unheard of. Like in your story, it's like having all that student debt. I think it was $90,000 in student debt.
Wow.
At that point, which, it's kind of crazy that kids coming out of law school today, they have like $250,000 in debt. It's staggering. But the point is, there's a very heavy pull to get a job, to be able to pay those bills. So to like dive into your own business is kind of insane. I guess we're two kind of nutty guys right here.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm still not sure if I'd recommend it straight out of school. I would say probably 4 or 5 times I nearly bit the dust, because every time that I started making money and I wanted to grow the business and double up, I had to risk it all again. I had to take all the profits that I earned and then dump it back into the company to either hire a new person or try a new marketing strategy or build out a new office or whatever it was. And throughout my 20s, it was just this rocky roller coaster of growth, of growing a bit and then risking it all, growing a bit, risking it all. Any one of those could have, not worked out. There are times where I had 6 weeks cash flow remaining, and I was just watching that chip down. And then you land your next customer and whew, you've survived a little bit and you're going to push forward a bit. And that roller coaster went on until probably almost close to 10 years building that business out, until we've now more kind of stabilized. We grow a little bit slower, more organically, more in a more healthy, strategic way than kind of risking the whole fort to get to the next level now.
Wow. 6 weeks of cash flow. I mean, I have to say that, like, through a lot of my journey, I would have been envious of your 6 weeks of cash flow. a lot closer, to the vest than that over here. Very, very often. I mean, there's so many, how many times has it been like, oh my God, payrolls this week, and we don't have it. And like, so what's it going to be, and how's it going to go? And it's always worked out, but it's, yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it's like, not clear that I'd recommend it to everyone. There is something to be said for having that stability. But, here we are, like all those years later, like we're still here. We're still here. Same company on both sides. Your company, my company, the same company that we founded right out of school. Somehow we survived, and that's awesome. And let's see what we can teach people from kind of like what we've learned. And I think there's a lot of different angles we can go at this from. But let's just say, with regard to the product sphere and product development, like what path do people follow, or should people follow in 2021? Like in 1999, when you started, there was a certain path, right? But as you were out to try to develop your own product, but now in 2021, what's the path look like to develop a product, to develop an idea that's in your head and get it out there into the world?
I'm glad you brought the time frame up there, because 2021 and going into 2022 here is an incredible time to be in the product space. Like, I almost call it the perfect storm of opportunity for anyone out there that has like an invention idea or a product idea, some sort of gadget, whether it's electronic or non-electronic, could be anything from toys to tools, houseware, whatever the case is. It really is the perfect storm of opportunity right now. And there's kind of 6 major things that I think about when I think about the industry right now that are big. First and foremost, over the next 20 to 30 years, everything will be connected with a computer chip. Some in a small way, some in a big way. The chair that you're sitting on will have, some chip to tell you that foam needs to be replaced, and here's the part number, whatever else. Very simple to much more complicated.
The Internet of Things, basically.
Absolutely. The Internet of Things, or just interconnectivity with chips based on that, or even just very simple linear stuff like tagging in your groceries at the grocery store or whatnot. Passive chips that become active when you put a power source near them, and then they give some sort of information on an RFID chip, as an example, right? Like, absolutely everything, whether you love it or hate it, it is happening. It's already, you notice the Nest thermostats on the house walls, and smart glasses and all this sort of stuff. Technology is creeping into our lives to the point where biology, hardware, and software are all merging together into one sphere. Mark Zuckerberg likes to call it the metaverse, but that's out there and emerging. But hardware is connecting with software at a rocket pace. So what's happening here is everything is getting redesigned. The whole world's going through its next industrial revolution, essentially, where everything around us is getting redeveloped, let's say, into new products, let alone not just new ideas and new products or combinations of things, but also just the same products being redeveloped for the modern world. That's happening right now. And that's where a lot of these invention ideas or product ideas are coming from, is people putting 2 things together and coming up with a great idea out of it. So that's big. But going further, number 2, the product design tools, prototyping techniques, software, et cetera, have made it exponentially easier on a much lower budget to get a new product tested, prototyped, put into the market, even potentially revised, et cetera. It's way easier to get a product simply into users' hands or into testing than it ever was before, especially when I started out. The tools weren't nearly to what they are, let alone the prototyping techniques to test stuff out. Third, big companies are spending less on their own internal R&D on new products and more on acquiring startups. They are letting the world develop the next big idea. You listeners out there, come up with that next idea, prove the model, then they buy you out. And they make it 100 times the size. It's a win-win for both parties. You exit on a great exit and your product skyrockets because it's actually relatively inexpensive for them to buy you, as opposed to having developed the product, let alone the intel you give them along the way of the users you had and whatnot that actually use the product, the reviews, et cetera. So there's a tremendous amount of value. And we're seeing this at the very high levels at like the Peloton IPOs and whatnot, but it's trickling all the way down to household gadgets and whatnot. People that come up with something new and interesting, they get acquired. Most of our clients that hit even the low 7 figures in product sales are getting acquired or have been acquired. If you look at Go Fish or Moonlight or PetBot, et cetera, half the products on the homepage of our website, yes, they were good success stories, but then they got bought out. And it's an incredible story because now they scale and grow from there, right? Get global reach. Number 4, and this is a big one. There's more support than ever before. Something that I kind of mentioned in my journey back in the early days didn't exist. If there's over 100 times more incubator spaces and accelerators than there were 20 years ago worldwide. And these are things between your WeWork facilities or hardware incubators or just different organizations that are built around supporting at startups at the government levels, at the private levels, at all government levels too, like municipalities, federal, statewide, you name it. There's more support than ever before for early stage startups. 5, especially, and this is particular to products, additive manufacturing. The ability to not only prototype a product, but manufacture like 50, 100, 200 units, get them into real users' hands, have people actually purchase these things, and then learn, fix, tweak, refine before you spend the big capital to actually go to a full production run, either locally or overseas. And then I would say the last one is crowdsourcing and crowdfunding. It's a tremendous opportunity right now where you can develop a product to the prototype phase, then raise a bunch of money on crowdfunding campaigns, people who are pre-purchasing your product to pay for your actual production run. So it makes it far easier for you to get from that prototype phase to your first production run, even if it's just additive, like we just talked about. It's an amazing way to actually get that product out to the market, to test it, to validate it, and to either drop it if it's not working, change it if it's not working, or improve upon it based on user feedback if it is working. And that is a tremendous opportunity that's really just emerging over the last few years and becoming very prevalent to early stage startups. So those, I say, were the big 6 when it comes to hardware in particular, but a lot of that also crosses over to what's happening in the software and services industry as well.
Yeah, I think that's amazing, and I think it really does. I think like all of those opportunities for getting your product out there, or kind of frameworks for looking at how you best get your product out there, I think it applies. I think it's pretty universal. And among those, like, one thing you mentioned was with the tools of kind of getting your product in someone's hands. It's like, I think back to when I started doing this in the mid 90s, and it was like, if you have a product and you're going to manufacture it yourself, presumably you're going to either, work out a deal with some type of distributor, or you're going to take an ad in a magazine. Like that would be the suggestion is like, oh, you've got a home product. You should look into, get a rate card from Better Homes and Gardens and find out how much it is to take a quarter-page ad, maybe toward the back. And like, you'd need to actually place an ad in order to generate traffic, to get customers, because how else would you reach them? There was no kind of like social media viral, viral launch techniques. None of those things really existed back then. And now it's like you can basically reach millions of people just by being clever with your messaging, and that truly didn't exist back then.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, one of our clients had just released like a month ago, KickFix. It's a laundry hamper for under your bed. 25 million views on a new account on TikTok. Like the exposure that they got, they haven't even started into their crowdfunding campaign yet. And they've got just such a tremendous following of people who are just super excited for their new invention, which is a relatively simple design. It's beautiful. It's a great design. But it's one of those things where it's not overly complicated, but a lot of people wanted it around the world. And now they've built a huge following almost overnight, just from a social media spinoff, just a regular couple with a cool idea. And it just blew up, went absolutely viral. Now, obviously that doesn't happen all the time, but it just, and we can actually talk about it later on in the show, Rich, too, if we kind of go in order here of kind of the industry and then how to develop a product. But I'm happy to talk about some tips and tricks for selling a product. But there are many opportunities today which didn't exist back then. I mean, I just highlighted crowdfunding as one of them, but there's probably about a half dozen others in the hardware space alone that are very unique over the last few years that give a tremendous amount of power to new startups and new brands try to break into the market.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, I'm happy to talk about like tips and tricks for selling a product. Like let's go for it.
Well, first and foremost, I think the most important thing to understand about a product is the development side. But what is the goal of development? Because the big thing when you think about a product is it's a bit confusing. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of data out there. And if you have this invention idea, you're not really sure what to do with it. Well, I'll tell you very clearly, you need to understand what the end goal of a startup is. And it's 2 things: manufacturing and intellectual property. You need to ensure that you're doing what it takes to get the product to production, to get real sales to real users that actually pulled out their credit card to buy your thing and then have written reviews back to say, this is a great product. There is no shortcut or no get rich quick scheme in the product development world. Every major startup that you talk to that's been successful will tell you the same story. They developed a product, they got it to market, they filed some IP on different strategies, which Rich, you were great to talk about all the ways to do that on our show in particular. But the key there was you have to get to market with real product in real people's hands eventually. That's how you create a valuable business. Now, there are maybe some earlier phases where potentially you could get into licensing, but very rarely does that happen until you've actually made some sales, or even just in a very small way to prove and validate the market. And even if it does happen at an earlier phase, you're going to get a fraction of the value than if you just took it one step further and actually got products into real people's hands. So the big thing to understand for 99+% of successful hardware startups out there, you must, one way or another, whether it's you or a partner or a licensee or whatnot, you must get this product to market. And of course, you want to have all that underlying IP to protect it. Now, to develop the product, it happens in a series of steps. First and foremost is your kind of ideation and sketching. And this stuff you can just do at home. If you've got that new invention idea, one of the easiest things you can do is Google it and start sketching. Just, you don't have to be good at sketching, just to visually ideate the page and then write it down. What does your product do? Who does it serve? It can be done on a page. So that's kind of step one. And that, I think, is a very important step. And believe it or not, a lot of the clients that come to us, they haven't even started with that step. It's just been brewing in their head, but it's a lot easier and more efficient on everybody involved if you just kind of note down that idea and kind of give yourself some clarity on just the ballpark direction of what you want this thing to do. It doesn't mean you have to know how it's going to be done. That's for the designers to do, but you need to have a general understanding. So that's the first step. Second step is industrial design. It's a confusing word, but it's the industry's lingo to mean the visual design of the product with some underlying understanding of how it's actually going to be engineered. That is the industrial design industry, essentially. So it's somewhat a mix of visual design, let's call it art, and mechanical engineering, which is, hardcore math. Somewhere in the middle is industrial design. And that's very important for a new physical hardware product, because that's the person who is not only creating the use case and the value to the actual market, but how this thing's actually going to get manufactured. How do you produce this thing? How do you make sure it's going to work physically with the idea or the framework that you came up with? And that's done in computer-aided design through CAD software and through advanced simulations and whatnot. That gets you to the point where you get into your mechanical engineering, which is actually detailing every little bolt and screw along with it, which then pushes you into your first rough prototype, which is your first rough kind of quasi-functioning version of your product, then into your full test prototypes, 1 or 2 prototypes to actually see how it's working, to actually run some tests, maybe get a handful of users to try it out and give you feedback, which then leads you to the big one, which is manufacturing. Now, through that process, and Rich, it would actually be great to hear from you, but through that process, you should have some IP considerations in the beginning, at the end, and also as you continue to develop as you go. So Rich, maybe I'll pass it back to you just to kind of highlight through that process from ideation to sketching, design, engineering, and then prototyping. Where should you be thinking about the IP pieces of it? Because I think that's very important for clients to understand as well.
Oh man, you're putting me on the spot now. I don't really know much about IP. Well, look, here's one big picture way that I like to say it is like you protect an idea at the point at which you have something valuable. So it's like if you have a concept and you're like, okay, the product itself isn't necessarily new, or the idea I have isn't necessarily new. I think I see an opportunity here. Then maybe there isn't something valuable yet. So maybe you have to develop it further until you're like, oh, I just came up with a clever twist on how this thing should work. So then now that you think you have something valuable, something that you feel you would be concerned if other people then took that portion of it, that's when you ought to begin protection and do something about it. But a lot of times, people will come to me when it's too early. Like they kind of know what they want. It's like, I want a new type of soap dispenser, but they haven't really created anything yet of value. But maybe then a few months down the road, maybe it's through prototyping that they then come to the thing which they say, okay, now this is the clever solution, that's when they should start with protection. And a lot of times what people do is they will file a patent application knowing that it's going to evolve over time. But the point of that first or earliest filing is to establish their rights as much as it can be for the initial concept, for the initial part of it that seems valuable and unique. And granted, it could develop over time, but then we deal with that when we get to it. And just kind of pointing back to what you said earlier about having something that it's rather difficult to just kind of sell an idea or license an idea. You want to get it into people's hands. So there's actually a middle step there too, which I think is important. So what you're referring to is like actually generating some product sales to demonstrate proof that this is something that people want. So that definitely is extremely helpful toward getting a licensing deal, licensing agreement. Is proof that you could sell it. Like, what's better than that? Intermediate step, though, just kind of going into what you do, is like having something that you could place in other people's hands. So it's like, I know sometimes people want to pitch an idea based upon their exhibits and their charts and their pictures. But if you could actually even design it enough and prototype it far along, bring it far along the prototyping chain enough that you could hand it to someone that you're pitching it to, being able to get it into their hands, that in itself is way more valuable than just having the idea. And then again,
absolutely,
the next level is being able to generate some sales that you could then use to show proof that it is something that people want.
Well, and that's what's so unique about hardware is that people won't really believe in it, whether it's just an investor. You're trying to get an angel investor to get you, let's say, from the rough prototype phase, maybe to your pre-production phase or whatnot. Nothing excites the investor or the potential buyer or the potential partner or the wholesaler, retailer, distributor, or whatnot than the physical thing in their hand. And I think about the Hatchimals product by Spin Master Toys. I remember talking to the product developer, the ideator that came up with that at Spin Master. And he said, I had this fantastic idea and I presented it all and I kept going up the chain and everybody said, yeah, that looks nice, this and that. And he said, at one point it just kept getting kind of put aside. And it was just another toy idea and whatever else. And eventually he said, I'm just going to build this thing and set it in front of them. And this animal hatches out of the egg and all this sort of stuff. Well, as soon as you put it in front of the board of the review committee to actually develop it into a product, and it did its little thing, and the animal came out of the egg and all that, everybody exploded. And of course, that was because they saw it physically and they were able to feel the dream. What is the passion that's actually getting enacted from that product, whether it's solving a utilitarian purpose like a tool, or whether it's something fun like this, like a toy. You have to be able to truly believe in that idea to get the best funding values or to get funding in general. So nothing better in hardware than actually having that thing. And of course, that toy went on to be this multi-$100 million selling toy around the world, but it all started with the prototype. And it was a prototype that was good enough to showcase the product, to test it out, to get it in front of real users, and then, spin up the excitement to then get it into a real product and move on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's the value of having something that you could put in people's hands to evoke that emotional reaction that they then could imagine that the customer would have with the product, or in the case of an investor, that they could then imagine the end user having, that will then end up allowing this company to grow in the way that you're telling them it would, and why it's worthy of investment.
Yeah, and think about it. This is manufacturing, right? Going back to the goal, it's manufacturing. So whether or not you're looking for a stepping stone process, like maybe trying to get an early stage licensing deal at the, say, prototype phase, or an investor, or whatever else, their mind is thinking about manufacturing. Again, back to the end goal, manufacturing and IP. So you've got you've got this great idea in this prototype, and you think it's going to change the world. The only thing that investor or buyer or partner or whatever else is going to be thinking about is how are they going to sell this, and how are they going to monetize the production of this? It always comes down to production at the end, which seems like simple logic, but most inventors get so caught up with the details and the features and the specs and the ideas that they lose sight of the economics. And the economics are very simple. I have something to sell. Are you willing to buy it? What's the profit margin on it? It's as simple as that. And then, of course, how many of them can I sell? Which is what they're thinking. And that's your pitch. And that's the magic that'll come out of that prototype, is being able to convince an investor that a lot of people are going to buy it. And as such, because you've worked with Rich and have the IP nailed, that's the key. They both own this product for the next 20 years, but they've also got something that's very enticing to the market. And all the engineering has, been ideally close to done or is done if you're into the production phase, so that if they're either investing or licensing or simply buying product off you at wholesale or whatnot, no matter what way you look at it, you are going to be giving them a very valuable proposition here. And that you need all those pillars to be acting together in order for them to actually either cut the big check or cut you the big deal.
Absolutely. And so again, I think the message really is to have the end goal in mind, because that is going to illuminate the path of the rest of the journey.
You've got it.
And there is so much that we could talk about. I mean, there's so much knowledge that you could share on this. I unfortunately have to wrap it up for this time. I think I'd love to interview you again and get further into kind of your experience with this product journey. And for now, if people want to get in touch with you or learn more about you, how do they go about doing so?
Well, the thing I'm most excited about right now is the podcast, the Product Startup Podcast. It's productstartup.com. And we've cleared over 105 episodes. I think your episode was, I believe, 105 or 106, Rich. So if you check out, just Google Product Startup Podcast or check it out on your favorite podcast player. We're on every medium. And there's tons of different conversations with some of the world's leading experts, including Rich, on all the different elements of hardware specifically. So it's hardware products, consumer products, how to get them from that sketch on a napkin through to store shelves. And it's been a lot of fun on that journey, especially now that we've cracked 100 episodes. And but if you want to reach out to me personally, anybody that comes on from the show and reaches out to me on LinkedIn, I will gladly add back if you add me as a connection. And if you want to check out our website, makodesign.com, MAKO design.com, there's about 1,000 blog articles there for everything under the sun about developing a product, as well as a bunch of resources, videos, all the rest. So, Rich, really appreciate you having me on the show. This has been fantastic. Great questions. And thanks as well for being on the Product Startup Podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for listening to Innovations and Breakthroughs with your host, Rich Goldstein. Be sure to click subscribe, check us out on the web at innovationsandbreakthroughs.com, and we'll see you next time.